of life and death. Today I'm continuing our time that we're focusing on prayer. It's actually meant to be Cameron who's meant to be speaking here today, but unfortunately he's unwell. He's unwell. He's had COVID and he's still in the midst of isolating, so we trust that he will be on the improve. So you're getting me on short notice, but it's kind of an interesting thing when you kind of get thrust into this particular space. We had some discussions in various people that I connect with in this past week. One of my clever children suggested now is a great opportunity to use ChatGPT to generate a sermon. In the office, one quick-witted team member suggested, well, the theme for today is listening prayer. So maybe you could just do something like this. Let's be quiet for 10 minutes and listen. It's not quite like that. In fact, Cam and I had arranged that I was going to share some thoughts in the middle of his talk, but we'll get to that in a moment. I actually have also found this week kind of sad in a different way. Yesterday, I think, was a sad day for the world of global Christianity. I think one of the most influential pastors and authors passed away yesterday, and personally for myself, it was someone who I have been incredibly inspired by and read and listened to much of his work, a guy by the name of Tim Keller. Tim Keller was a Presbyterian pastor in New York City. Many kind of famous pastors in recent years have kind of become celebrities who feel like they're, like a kilometre wide but a centimetre deep. Some of them feel like they are so connected with political parties that they, kind of like you wonder who are they kind of testifying to, which tribe do they belong to. Tim Keller was I think, an amazing pastor and author, ministering in one of the most secular cities on the planet. In his gracious, winsome style, he saw many thousands of people come to know Jesus who knew to connect with Jesus, not with a particular political party. He was a guy who was able to combine a rigorous intellect, a determined commitment to truth, but also still have a graciousness that reached out across people from all spaces. He's written many different books. I'm going to put some up on the screen. I'm giving a plug this morning for the library. And numbers of them we have here in the library. They range from kind of super helpful pastoral topics, understanding the church, preaching, to areas of Christian living, devotional books, things on prayer and forgiveness, dealing with some of the pain and struggles of life. Tim has been through 2 bouts of cancer. It was pancreatic cancer in the end, which caused him to pass away. Forgiveness. He also wrote books in kind of the world of apologetics, books that are incredibly easy to understand, but also have a depth that will resonate with people who are kind of challenging things intellectually as well. I've read personally probably the great majority of them, and I would say to you, as this plug, that you could find any number of them personally helpful. And if there's one thing you remember from this talk today, maybe it's that you could purchase or borrow one of the books from the library and read it. Or if that's not your deal, maybe you could go online and you could download a podcast or sermons. There's gazillions of him out there if you want to search for them. How are you going through our prayer series? How are you going? One of the themes that we've kind of spoken about in this prayer series was it to be extraordinary prayer. Kind of ordinary plus a little bit extra. Did you commit to any particular action? Did you commit to do something? Some of us wrote things out on the board in the foyer. How are you going? Did you tell someone else about what you're doing? If you are, don't give up, I want to say to you today. Don't give up. Persist is a wonderful character trait in all of life, but particularly with prayer. If you're with us physically today, or if you have been here some time, I want to give a shout out to those who are online. I had this in my head I wanted to do especially today. See, Matt Moran's not able to be here today. He was meant to be here, and he coordinates our online ministry. I don't know if you're aware of this, but if you're joining us online, there are a bunch of people who serve you in ways that maybe you don't really see. So today, I can see at least 2 people on cameras, I know that upstairs there's someone who's coordinating what shots are shown on the online screen. I know that there are people there who are changing overheads in a sense because they're different online than they're here because they don't kind of work the same. There's someone coordinating how the sound works because sound in the auditorium is different than sound online. And they do an amazing job. So if you're online, you can help to be appreciative of how they're serving you today. But if you have been here physically at some point in time, in all likelihood you have driven past Yarra Valley Grammar. In fact, to get here, pretty much you have to drive past Yarra Valley Grammar, okay? Can you tell me this question? Over the past few months, there has been one of those real estate billboards on the roundabout, on the Yarra Valley Grammar side of the roundabout. Have you seen it? Some have seen it. Some at least will acknowledge they've seen it. Can you remember what's on that billboard? 3 girls. You'd be wrong, Fran. I love you, Fran. Sorry. It might be, look, I might be wrong now because that might be back up. But over the past few months, there's been a different billboard than that one. Do you know what's on it? It's one of those brag billboards. You know what I'm talking about, the brag billboard? There's a young man there. He's nicely dressed in the school uniform, isn't he? Because he was kind of the school dux, right? I think he got an ATAR of 99.35 or something like that. It boldly declares to the world his achievement. You driven past some of these board signs in recent times? There's heaps of them. It's not just Yarra Valley Grammar. I'm picking on them because they're across the road. But I've seen them in other places as well, where schools kind of like to do the brag. What do you think it says about the school when you read that? What do you think it says? Yeah, it says success, doesn't it? It says, send your kid to Yarra Valley Grammar and you can be just like, I think his name's Thomas. Well, probably only a few people can be just like Thomas. It says, we produce achievement. How good are we? This is what we value. As I've looked at that billboard on a number of occasions, I've not only thought of the school, I've also thought of the young man. Here's a young man, he's probably 18. What does it mean to him to have his face plastered on that billboard? What does it say about him? How is his identity shaped by this very public recognition? You know, I suspect that in 20 years, one of the things that he will remember about his life is that he was on that billboard because he achieved something. I understand the world of achievement. It's how I lived my childhood, defined by school marks, sporting medals and trophies, graduation certificates. It's how I tried to earn the love and approval of my father. And I don't think that I'm alone. Because in our Western society, in Australia, it's how we live much of our life, isn't it? What have I achieved? What's my job title? How much do I earn? Our life for so many is defined by achievements. It's defined by what have I done? What tasks have I ticked off? It's not really defined by relationships, is it? Do you think that's a good thing? Task, actions, achievements. When you close your eyes at night, how do you consider of the defining moments of your day. What you've done or who you are. Because for so many of us, tasks and achievements, they become the defining element of how we consider about ourselves. A few weeks ago, I received a notification from Google bringing to my attention that they were bringing a new feature into the Google ecosystem that improved the way that tasks were integrated with the rest of the Google sort of software. Did you receive that? Maybe you did, or more likely you didn't notice it. Maybe it actually depends on the type of person that you are, how you responded. So let me ask you a few questions here to try to find out what sort of person you are here today. So my first question is this. In your pockets, right now at this particular moment, do you have a list on you? Do you have a list on you? A list of any sort? Okay? It could be paper. It could be electronic. Doesn't matter. Do you have a list on you? Or here's a follow-up question to that. Do you use some sort of list or task manager or software app? Do you have one like that? So here's my next question. Are you a person who hates lists? Who hates lists? I mean, all lists do is make me feel inadequate. That's all they do. They make me feel guilty because they are just a record of all the things I haven't done. Is that what lists are like for you? They overwhelm me. They make me feel anxious. I'm not going to ask you to put up your hand here, okay? If you're in the next category, maybe you could put up your hand. I think it's time for a bit of confession. Or are you a person who loves lists? I mean, there are people like me who think of lists as utilitarian, you know. They are helpful for my daily organisation of life. I kind of need them to make sure that I'm organised. I don't really love them. I don't really hate them, but I just need to use them. Now, if you're a person who loves lists, you're a person who does this. You've completed a task, and what you do is you actually go back and you write it on your list just so that you can put a line through it. Put your hand up. Yeah, it's confession time. You know who you are and you love lists. Here's a list of the list task managers that I've used in my life, okay? Firstly, I used my memory. But you know what? It ain't so good at what it used to be like. Then I used paper. And paper is okay. In fact, I still use paper a little bit. But the problem I find with paper is that you run out of paper. And then the problem is that you have half of the paper is filled up with things that you put a line through it. Half of it is undone things, but there's no room. So you've got to transfer all the stuff that you've undone to a new piece of paper. The next thing I've used is Google Tasks. I'm really indifferent about Google Tasks. It does integrate with your calendar, but I don't really find it that exciting. Because I used to be a finance person, I've used Microsoft Excel. Anybody here? A couple of bean counters among us, welcome. Then I used a program called Wunderlist. Wunderlist. Has anybody experienced the wonder of Wunderlist? Some of us here have experienced the wonder of Wunderlist, right? Wunderlist to me was one of the first things I used this maybe like 10 years ago. It used to be able to be used on my laptop and on my phone or something, you know, like it was a cross-platform, so it was kind of helpful when others weren't. But then I ditched Wunderlist because Megan, Queen of Lists, see, she knows who she is. Megan put me onto Todoist. And Todoist is listed. How's that? You like the little... It's full of bad puns today, all right? Todoist is listed as kind of like the number one list manager of the day. You know what's good about Todoist? Is it... Yeah. Todoist gives you like a little dopamine release. It's like when you tick off a bunch of things, it actually gives you like a special reward. Kind of says, woo-hoo-hoo, how good are you? That's why Megan looks so happy all the time. Achievements. hearts, lists. You know, that would be a pretty good summary of the way I learned to pray. A good prayer time was defined by working through a list. A good prayer life was defined by hitting goals. 7 days in a row praying, it's like Todoist is going to give me a little bing, bing, bing. An exceptional prayer time. That was when the prayer list items were kind of checked off. Here's an answer. My prayer was defined by asks and tasks. I don't really know how to say that well. I realised when I wrote it down that my diction's not that great. Have you ever felt like that? You ever lived like that? Judged yourself by that rule? Defined your prayer life in that way? To be honest, that's not how I think about prayer today. Don't get me wrong. I don't think that coming before God and having a prayer journal or a list or something like that, at various times in my life I've had sort of prayer calendar, diary type things of people I've been praying for. I just believe nowadays that I think it's limiting. If my life was defined by checklists, if my relationships with my friends, if my marriage was defined by checklists, things that I'd ticked off, tasks that I'd achieved, I think that you can understand, you feel like you'd have a pretty utilitarian, very practical kind of set of relationships, wouldn't you? Anybody who's been married for more than maybe a month knows what it's like to slip into a marital relationship that is defined by practicalities. Have we done the shopping? Have you paid that bill? Forgot to lock the door? Is that really the way that we want to define a relationship? Is it the way we want to really define prayer? Because I don't think it's really the biblical image for what it is to pray. It's not excluded from it in terms of coming before God and asking for things. But it would be limiting to define it holistically like that. I love the image, and I did mention this verse a few weeks ago when we began this series. I love the image of Genesis chapter 3, when it says, when the cool evening breezes were blowing, the man and his wife heard the Lord God walking about in the garden. There's this sense of communion together. My wife and I walk together semi-regularly, not as regularly as she would like, which is reasonable, but semi-regularly. It might be every 2, sometimes 3 weeks or something like that. And we don't power walk. There's not a starting and finishing time. No stopwatch running. It's normally at a pretty relaxed tempo. It allows time for conversation. We discuss kind of all manner of things. Work, ourselves, children. If you're married, you know the kind of the drill. Both of us speak. Both of us listen. Have you ever considered that when we pray, it can be as much about listening as it is about speaking? Now, one of my favourite characters, people from the Bible, is Elijah. He's an incredible life. You can read about it in 1 Kings from probably about, I think it's like chapter 15 through to about somewhere in the 20s. He's called out of obscurity to be a prophet to an evil, rebellious nation. They are governed by a weak king and a manipulative queen. It's a story, in a sense, of incredible achievement. You know what I mean? There's some fantastic events that happen. There's a reason why on one particular occasion Jesus is with a number of the disciples, and he asked them, "Who do you say that I am?" He said, "Some people say that you're Moses," kind of like, a key Israelite Jewish figure, or Elijah. He's a big achievement figure in the world. In his life, he has a time when he's fed miraculously in the wilderness. Another time, he raises a boy who is dead. He prophesies that a drought is coming, and it happens. And then there is kind of almost like the grand final scale event of his life, where he confronts literally hundreds of false prophets. They come up to a mountain. It's like the MCG of worship in the Judaistic world. And there's an enormous crowd of prophets and kind of the power figures of the day. And they have this confrontation on the top of a mountain. It's not a skinny mountain. Mount Carmel is kind of like a flat tabletop mountain. It can accommodate a whole bunch of people. And there's this incredible confrontation event where Elijah prays, and from heaven, fire comes down and consumes a sacrificial bull. It consumes the wood that the bull is on. It consumes even the rocks and the soil that surround it. I mean, it's this amazing event. An answer to prayer. The checklist is complete. The achievement is done. In bold, it's ticked off and rubbed out. Then we read, he falls in a heap and he's filled with fear. And in 1 Kings 18, it tells us that he gets up, he ate and he drank and had some food, and it gave him enough strength to travel. He runs away for 40 days and nights to Mount Sinai. Comes to a cave. And in the solitude of the cave, God speaks to him. What are you doing here? He gives his complaint. I've done all these things. I've been faithful. I've served you. No one else has. Everybody else has abandoned. Yeah, whinge, whinge, whinge. Go out and stand before me on the mountain, God tells him. Stands there. And then there's this kind of like these naturalistic events that are, like mind-blowing. It tells us God passes by. A windstorm hits the mountain. The rocks are torn loose. But God's not in the wind. There's an earthquake, but God's not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there's a fire, and God's not in the fire. And after that, there's the sound of a gentle whisper. And when Elijah hears it, and I've just lost my last couple of pages. No. I've literally lost my last couple of pages on my notes. Have you got them, Tom? Tom's got one. That'll do. I'm going to ask someone to quickly run my notes up to me. Sorry? It's time to listen. I know it's time to listen. It's the 10-minute listening event that we're about to do. How does God speak in this time? We know he didn't speak. It wasn't in the storm or the earthquake or the fire. But it was in the quietness, wasn't it? And if I said to you today that when you pray, do you also hear from God? How would you respond? How would you respond? So I'm going to share you just a few very, very simple, practical things, which is what I do. Okay? So the first thing I do when I try to listen in praying is this. I start with low expectations. If you're going to do this for the first time, you've never done it before, and think that you're going to be able to do it easily, and everything will happen like magic, it won't happen immediately for you. Most of us live busy, noisy lives. It's hard to be still and listen. The second thing I would say to you is commit to do it regularly if you want to try this. Can't be driven by your feelings on a particular day. Third thing I'm going to say is find a consistent space. I don't know what it is about geography and place, but sometimes being in a particular place, if I try to do this and I'm sitting at my desk, it does not work. I have a particular chair that I sit in when I do it. The fourth thing I want to say to you is remove electronic devices. It's hard to be still when you have deadlines and beeps and notifications going. The fifth thing I want to say to you is take a pen and paper when you do this, when you want to pray and listen in praying. I find this the most important. When I try to go and sit down and do some listening in my prayer, I'm useless for at least the first 3 minutes, at least. Because when I'm quiet, all of a sudden, all these things come flooding into my head. And the only way I can deal with the floods of them is to write them down. Leah quoted Psalm 46 before, and I'm not going to be harsh on you, Leah, but I've read it that same way as you. When it says, be still and know that I am God, it's a beautiful expression, isn't it? And I read that and it says, be still, Andrew, but actually that's not really what it's saying. It's really saying, be still the noise of the world. The be still is an injunction against the world. You can read a couple of passages earlier on in Psalm 46 in verses 2 and 3 and 6. It tells us about how the noisiness of the world is around us. Earthquakes coming, mountains trembling, the nations are in chaos. It's kind of this sense to say, that should be still so that this can happen. Now, I think it's great to read it, and sometimes I read it exactly the same as you, Leah. But with the pen and paper, it helps me to kind of get away from the noise. And the fifth thing I would say is pray a regular prayer. Here's a helpful one. Dear God, teach me to listen. Times are noisy, my ears are weary. Raucous sounds continually assault them. Give me the spirit of Samuel who said, speak, for I'm listening. Let me hear you speak in my heart. Let me get used to the sound of your voice. Its tones will be familiar. The sounds of earth die away. Only sounds be the music of your voice. Write your own, can I say? Write your own. The last thing I'll say then is listen. In your prayer, you ask that God's Spirit would speak and that you could still hear that still small voice. Now, when we started this a series based around prayer, the immediate thing that we all default to is action, isn't it? Kind of the immediate thing. I'll get my list out. I want to say to you that it's equally as important in our prayer is to listen. You think about it, if I was to actually take the advice of my quick smarty pants team and just stop for 10 minutes right now, be quiet. At the start, you would hear all sorts of voices. If you've got the courage to say, God, please speak, eventually we're able to hear his voice. But we believe in a God who speaks, a God who has spoken creation into being. We see a God who worked through men and women of God to write the scriptures that we read that reveal the nature of God. We believe in a Spirit of God that lives and dwells among us right now. And when we go home, when you sit in your chair, when you travel to work on that train, or when you walk around the park, a Spirit who lives within, who leads and guides, who convicts and encourages. And if we believe in that, shouldn't we then be still enough to listen and hear? So I want to say to you today, friends, brothers and sisters, those of you who hate lists, those of you who love lists, those of you who are busy physically and busy in your mind, be still. You know, it's my experience that people who have been in churches for a while at times get very kind of humdrumish sometimes about faith. You know, it's kind of like I feel like sometimes I'm going through the same rituals, the same practices. It's like we say, it's almost like I believe in God. I do believe in who Jesus is, but the reality of it just seems a long way away from where I am. You know what I mean? Like just the daily experience of it just doesn't seem that close and intimate. Can I say to you today, to be still and listen. And maybe for you it might mean when you go home today, you find a place to be still. What time works for you the best? If you're a morning person, or if you're an evening person, or if you're a lunchtime type person, be still. When I practice this myself, I normally combine it when I read some part of God's Word. And in that quietness is often when the time that God brings to my mind and heart things that in the busyness I just don't hear. Sometimes it's speaking to the very nature, I feel like, of who I am. There might be some need for encouragement. There might be some conviction. Sometimes it's about people. The things I would never hear if I was noisy. So maybe as we go away today, maybe we'll step into a new world of my prayer is not defined by things that I'm asking God, tasks that I need to do, but by listening. Let's pray, shall we? For our God, in quietness we know that you speak. And so before all the things that we say, we ask that you would speak.